Io ho conosciuto David grazie ovviamente a Lucio Amelio. Lui aveva già esposto a Napoli e Lucio, che era infelicemente già malato, aveva un desiderio, quello di fare una mostra di David a Parigi, a Pièce Unique. Diceva era come una consacrazione per i suoi artisti amati, molto amici.
In 1986, Lucio Amelio called me and invited me to come to the opening of Terremotus, and he sent me a ticket. I flew there, and the same day I arrived was the opening of the show. And I had met Lucio in New York because I was showing with Anina, and so I met him in her gallery, and he had bought works of mine. He was a very dynamic and colorful guy, so that much I knew. But staying there for a week or so, I had the idea that I'd like to work there. I asked him if he thought it would be possible. He said, absolutely, we'll do a show. We'll do a show in the spring. We'll just find you a studio if you want to work here. That would be wonderful. His immediate enthusiasm was very refreshing. An amazing man, the very model of the impresario. Incredible taste in the way that he dressed. An amazing feeling for art. An artist in his own right. It was very much a collaboration. And feeling that I found someone who really understood me and helped me to understand myself better. I mean, we became really close friends. I think I was very lucky because I got to know the city through my friendship with Lucio, and because he was so much a part of the city and the city a part of him, I was able to see it in a much more intimate way. I have a sense of real daily life being brought right into the heart of the city. In the course of a day, I might go with him. He would have things that he needed to do. And I liked very much that we could pass by the office of the newspaper, speak to a writer there. We'd encounter the director from the opera house on the street. In this way, rather than making special trips to see things, going to visit a friend, we would pass interesting things and he would talk. Lucio got to watch me working and became more familiar with my work and would speak to me about it, and it was very helpful to me because he expressed himself so beautifully, and he was able to put into words things that I was working with that I wouldn't have been able to explain, and that's magic. It was something that he liked very much, a kind of tension. I can only express it crudely. It's a kind of schizophrenic dissonance inside of an aspect of my work. For me, it's like a spring loaded inside. It keeps it taut, and if it works, keeps one going back to that work because it will never be either one thing or the other. It's constantly vibrating between these two near and maybe contradictory interpretations, And that, when I could do that, he really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed that he was able to express it. He gave me a way of making peace with that.
È qualcosa di molto onirico e Napoli è molto molto sensibile al sogno in genere e sono quadri che fanno sognare, ti seducono. Conosco amici napoletani che avevano acquistato quadri di David dall'uscio, ti posso dire che a distanza di anni loro vivono con felicità. Cioè al quotidiano, dice a me basta ritornare a casa, ok, sto stressato, sto angosciato per altre cose, mi siedo, mi fumo una sigaretta, mi bevo un whisky guardando il quadro e mi rallegra la giornata.
It's like a mandala. It's an engaging object that people will encounter and be encouraged to linger over, to look at. So the first thing is to seize their attention. And my hope is that in being engaged with this image, they will find some part of themselves there. So really the message is in the act of painting, the exploration, making something new, something that wasn't there yesterday is delightful. And in that I find myself. I understand my being, and I understand all kinds of other things. I reflect on painters that I know from the past or my contemporaries. That may or may not be apparent to someone looking at the painting. Someone who knows a great deal about the history of painting will see a number of things. Someone who knows nothing about the history of painting can still be engaged, and that's maybe the more fundamental thing, that they will be engaged and in reflecting see themselves, find something, a new understanding of some small aspect of themselves, and that's why I say mandala. I have to say that I paint because it's a way of communicating that has nothing to do with language. It's a vocabulary. The frame of these particular genres is a sort of set syntax of communication, and within that, playing with these elements, it's a way of speaking that leaves us free of the need to choose particular words. It was because of Anina that I first came to work in Italy. When she came to see my work in 1982, she asked me when I had been in Italy, and I'd never been out of the country. And she found that really amusing because my work was some kind of reflection of Mediterranean themes, and she thought maybe they came from film, or I think probably they came from looking at painting, but she thought I should go immediately, and so she arranged that I could go and work in Rome the first time for 5 months. That was in 1983, an eye-opening experience to be exposed to work that I think it would have been very difficult to discover in New York. Painters like Tapisis, or the Scuola Romana. Emilio Prime took me to see a show of the Scuola Romana. Another hugely generous person went out of his way to expose me to things that he was sure I hadn't seen. So before going to Naples, I was somewhat prepared, but Naples is another world. I was in Naples later. I was a couple of years older. It really was working there for a longer time and in the company of the friends that I made there, and I found myself at peace. I no longer felt like I needed to go somewhere to find something with that kind of anxiousness we have as kids, that there's something going on that I should know about and it's not happening here. I realized that there were many things going on all over the place, but the only thing that matters is whatever it is that's happening right here, wherever one is. That was maybe the greatest gift that Lucio gave me.
You have used figures from Commedia dell'arte in your landscapes and the marionettes in a cityscape.
The Punchinella, it's always fun to interpret this character because it comes so loaded with, it's such an eloquent way of communicating because he contains all these worlds within him. That's one thing. The puppets are another. They wind up acting the same in the theater of the context of a picture, but I was painting them because they fascinate me in the same way that the painting from Pompeii fascinates. The beautiful, sure quickness of the way that they're painted, their immaculate immediacy, and the authority in the artisan's means of communicating the features of a character, and the art of an expression that is so poignant and human and neutral so that it will function. I'm talking about the marionettes, it will function in every dramatic situation. And that, to hit that note is just so sublime. So those were both homage and study of great artifice. Let me get a cigarette. Well,
When you have figures from the Commedia dell'arte wandering on a meadow near trees, and in the background is a distant range of mountains.
I don't usually think that figurative painting is best served as narrative painting. I think that's a terrible confusion. But on occasion, I make narrative paintings, and the narrative is simple.
I see in your painting that there could be skyscrapers and some unusual fountain from a whole different epocha. What about these juxtapositions?
That's just our experience. That's just naturalism. Painting life as we encounter it. Those very antique fountains are surrounded by contemporary school kids and tourists, and that kind of confusion. Maybe an American thing too, that we've imported so many antique architectural forms and then they wind up standing next to fast food restaurants and modernist architecture. I think of the Gothic churches or Romanesque churches that we have in America next to shopping malls. So this is just our ordinary experience. So in terms of a picture, I mean, quite apart from surrealism and startling juxtapositions of shocking elements, our daily life is pretty shocking. It's just habit. So maybe it's a way of jostling those things to step outside a moment, that habit, to think just how curious it is. To go to another culture and bring a different way of working, a different way of seizing on themes, but to be in another context, it forms and transforms the way one can express themselves, because that thing you have in your pocket that's just always been there takes on a new aspect, and it's fresh for the people you're meeting, and then it becomes fresh for you, you understand it in another way because it's thrown into high relief or contrast.
The Museum of Archaeology in Naples.
It was like going to Mecca. I had seen works that had visited America from Pompeii. I'd seen a show in Boston in the 70s. In the Metropolitan, there are a few pieces. I was always enamored of the painting from Pompeii, what we have of antique Roman painting. That's what we have of antique Greek painting, really. I just always found that captivating. Beautiful naturalism, a kind of existential perspective, so much more human and convincing than the scientific perspective of the Renaissance. This real, keenly observed natural experience, wildlife, the human form, and architecture in a jumble of contradictory perspective, which is just the way we see it as we walk through a group of buildings. We're not fixed, immobile in a single point of view. It's an ongoing dialogue, reflecting on painting and reflecting on daily life and the intersection of my thoughts about the past and these painters whose work I was looking at in the National Gallery, and then the things that are happening every day.
A journey from one painting to another. I would even think of a theatrical troupe who were traveling from place to place, but also inside of an individual painting, there seems to be an itinerary. How do you choreograph those eyes of the person who's looking at the painting?
You want to keep their eye in the painting. One way to do that is to keep it moving between a few elements, so that the theme is not merely a focal object, but is being crisscrossed by a glance that's gathering other elements. Chinese paintings that we have from Pompeii, they have a lot in common because they both function in the same way and they're fruit of the same ambition to make a painting that is livable. It's there always. Painted walls are ever present. And so there's elements of space and this sublime harmony of an arrangement of objects that sit there tranquilly. Yes, there'll be a figure and then there'll be a tiny group of architecture with a very distant group of figures in another space, maybe another time, and yet these things sing, but never so loudly that they disturb what's going on in the room. They're there to be entered in a moment of reflection. They're just as quiet and just as beguiling as necessary and work well in every situation. Talking about paintings from Pompeii, it's what we have to imagine Greek painting, which was famous in its day and of which there remains very little evidence outside of these frescoes. And certainly the Greeks, in their architecture, were handling very sophisticated mathematical concepts together with a keen sense of human perception, the distortions in temple architecture, how we actually perceive things. A mathematical perspective well within their grasp, but their preoccupation was not, in this case, scientific, more maybe to do with human experience and with poetry and existential reality.
How do you begin a painting?
Sketching and thinking different things come to mind. I'll make a note of them as things freely happen on the page. I just have a sense of what might work, or what I might like to try to make work. There are times when I have a very clear feeling, and I have a sense from the beginning, I know what this is, and it's so clear, it's just a joy because it paints itself. I can see it, and getting there, I discover some things, and I may struggle with certain elements, but I know where I'm going, and when it's finished, it is perfectly clear. It says this. There are other times when it's a much more confused odyssey of things that are difficult to resolve, and that's also an engaging way of working. It can be more of a struggle, but in the end can be as satisfying to finally seize from this threatening chaos something I couldn't have imagined that teaches me something more than the other. Is that the right answer?
How could you describe the difference between a still life and a landscape?
Well, they're not all that different. It's scale and intimacy. Painting from life, naturalism. Landscape, you're outside. It's a different scale and environment, and trying to seize myriad elements and digest them, concentrate them into a form that evokes what you're experiencing. But still life is also a kind of field with elements in it. It's very much like a landscape, a very static landscape, painted in a more intimate way. I mean, you see that in Morandi, his point of view, to place the objects on a plane just below his line of sight, so you're looking directly into them. That's one way that I found fascinating, to encounter objects. Painting things more as we perceive them in a room, sitting on planes below our line of sight. Thinking of still lives of Pirandello. They're just simple objects left after work or during the course of a day, encountered as you re-enter a room and just taken like a snapshot. Keen naturalism. It's life as we perceive it. Something you've caught out of the corner of your eye. And then something else. I mean, in his poetry, the objects, an empty chair, in its insinuation of a person, is always a poignant theme. The chairs are wonderful to paint because they have so much personality, and it's so subtle because you're defining something by its absence. That's a difference. That kind of theater of still life. Landscape speaks of something else. It's something about our existence also, but it's more diffuse, harder to express in words. It's a big theme, big view, big concepts. I'm going to leave that now. I'm going to get out of the way of that argument. Bruegel's painting. It's a brilliant painting, if only because his means of including everything. Here's life on Earth. Here's everything that's happening. There's shipping coming and going, and fields are being plowed, and there are other people doing other things. There's a town, maybe. To say very simply, well, here's the world. The other freshness of that is to make a mythic tale immediate. Remember, it happened in the world. Here's your world, here's the world familiar to the people that might be seeing Bruegel's painting at the outset. You recognize that, and here's the story. It's happening with you nearby, painting holy tales in contemporary clothing. To bring the story to the viewer and put the viewer there, to make it intimate, to make it real. There's wit too, because of tininess, that the figure's tragedy is happening, and it's only happening to him. something profound and human about not making that so central a part of the theme. He's not a Greek. He's looking at the story in a completely different way.
You could locate that also in a very small still life of objects of everyday life. Chardin, he just had his daily life, and that was his subject. Joseph Cornell, this microcosm which becomes universal. Was that a question?
I think of Chardin a lot, and that very thing. Painting, it's not a very contemporary activity. I mean, I feel a lot of fellow feeling with the painters I know from the past and think about their daily lives and that kind of quiet, to slow down to the speed where you're in the right speed to be making painting. It takes stepping out of contemporary rush of things, even in Manhattan, to close the door. And there's all the energy of the city outside, but what you're doing is really a slow, quiet activity. Painting a dish can be an afternoon's activity, and what could be better?
The official Giorgio de Chirico metaphysical cities, they are Ferrara, Firenze, Rome, Venice, Paris, New York, and very importantly, Torino. How has living in Turin interacted with your painting?
Well, I was intrigued when I came here because thinking of De Chirico because of the architecture, certain elements that we know from his painting that one can find here. And it's also kind of a blank, which I like. It's a very polite environment. It doesn't insist on one thing or another. So to me it was an easy foreign place to begin working in because it left me the space to do just what I wanted. I thought probably I would make paintings here that I wouldn't have made anywhere else. What I've been doing here, I wouldn't have been doing in Boston, for example. It's fun, but really daunting to go into a new studio or begin painting in a completely empty house. I mean, immediately I feel the absence of painting, so there's a need to do something.
How does a painter watch a movie?
I am always fascinated if there's a picture on the wall in the background. It's always makes me curious because it's not the point of the scene. It's just something that it's there in the background and it's usually out of focus. So films are often a font of new ideas. It's a kind of rebus. There's a color patch of brilliant red, and there are some other very graphic elements, and it speaks to me like haiku. But that's the only difference. Otherwise, I'm following the action. I'm engaged by the drama. I watch them for entertainment. They're fun.
Diario le pizze integrale per i
Sì. Volevo uno, ma
My older brother Jerry was a painter, and he was painting from the time that I can remember. He was engaged with art and studying painting. He was very good. So I was very lucky. As he discovered artists that excited him, he would bring me to see them. We lived on Long Island, and he could bring me to museums in in the city, in the Brooklyn Museum. And so rather than being heroes, they were kind of everyday presences, or I regarded them as great affection, admiration. They were doing the thing that I felt I wanted to do from the time that I could think. Having my brother to teach me simple things about making volumes and shadows and ideas of color theory from when I was very tiny, and just knowing these people, having them as subject of conversation, like relatives or colleagues. Dali was very amusing, but I was never really enamored of him. His paintings that were good were surprising, and he was ever present. He was in all kinds of films, and he didn't seem to relate. I don't think of him as a great painter.
Ombrellaio, aggiustiamo gli ombrelli, l'arrotino.
When you arrived in New York and began working with Anina Nozay, that was a fantastic moment for art, for a totally new generation.
But maybe not the ideal moment to be a painter there. I mean, I had exciting and wonderful friends like Jean-Michel and Keith Haring, and Keith, for example, was very, very comfortable with the kind of level of attention and this kind of energy of celebrity, and he was able to work with that really neatly. Had a means at his disposal of expressing himself that worked perfectly in a very public context, and huge enthusiasm. And that was good and bad. It was good for me because I made shows I'm still proud of, but in a more ambivalent way. I didn't want all that attention because I felt there was more that I wanted to do, more time I wanted. So they were kind of cover at the same time that, to be honest, I thought, or maybe it was because of that, it was going to take more time to make my voice clear, because there were so many dynamic elements already engaging the public in a remarkable way. So Jean was wonderful to speak of. He was very quick, and speaking about art with him, or his remarks about things were always valuable, and his humor was tremendous. It was Kondo too. I spent a lot of time with George Kondo. He hadn't studied painting, he had great enthusiasm, and he was very prolific and quick study, absorbing the things, reproducing things by Borowski, for example, just to see something, to take it, to try to understand it. My take on painting was more the long view. It was something that I'd been fascinated by all my life, and so this remarkable moment was truly a remarkable moment, but I saw it more in context of being a remarkable moment in a lifetime of many more. Does that make sense? I wasn't really taken with it, and that has a lot to do with the nature of how art was being consumed in New York and in America at that time.
When you decide to paint a bird with the head of a woman wearing a late 1700s Madame de Pompadour hat with very large feathers, meticulously rendering all of the elements, what would be the reaction that you were wanting to inspire in the innocent bystander?
Well, surprising and engaging thing to look at. Not something you encounter every day. I was looking at carvings in an early medieval monastery, and this fabulous invention of vines and invented creatures that have nothing to do with anything in particular. It's just pure joy in creation of marvelous objects, fantastical things. And I liked that liberty. These things exist because they're a joy to see, not because they communicate anything in particular. These were not teaching elements, these were decorative inventions of the highest order, sheer energy. Things that fascinate me, those hilarious hairstyles from the 18th century. Fashion is always a treat for the eye. I mean, that's its whole point. So I like looking at fashion. I like looking at fashion from other times because we look at contemporary fashion, and it's a problematic, speaking about a contemporary industry, speaking about commodification of women, and so if your eye goes a little further, you can kind of avoid those pitfalls, but it's just full of elements that are fun to paint. I have no idea. I painted that because I thought it would really be fun. and I still don't really know what there is to make of it, but I think that they're objects we can live with. It's something that you can hang on your wall, and it will always surprise your guests.